Hello, and welcome back to another episode of the Western Canon Challenge, where we are reading the entirety of the Western Literary Canon out loud. Today we are completing journal collection number 32, and we are starting on October 28th of the year 1841. And with that, I will go ahead and get started. Good not to let the conscience sleep, but to keep it irritated by the presence and reiterated actions of reforms and ideas. Ellen H. asks whether reform is not always in bad taste. Oh no, the poet, the saint are not only elegant, but elegants. It is only the half-poet, the half-saint who disgust. Thus now the saint in us proposes, but the sinner in us executes so lamely. But who can be misled who trusts to a thought? That profound deep whereunto it leads is the heaven of heavens. On that pillow, softer than darkness, he that falls can never be bruised. I told C and M that Aunt Mary was no easy flute, but a quite national and clan-like instrument, a bagpipe for instance, from which none but a native Highlandman could draw music. I sometimes fancy that the bitterness and prosaic side of our condition only obtrude in our conversation, or attempt to paint our portrait to another. Silent and alone, I have no such sad, unredeemed side. Remove 2 miles if you suffer from the influences of fashion. Why should I still postpone my existence and not take the ground to which I already feel that I am at last entitled? Why do I suffer a reference to others, and to such others, to keep me out of that which is most mine? Because, dear friend, it is as yet a thought, and not yet a spirit. You have not quite served up to it. A foundation and cellar are good when one is going to build a house, but what is a foundation without a house but an offense to the eye and a stumbling block to the feet? Sensation is good as the organ, the servant, the body of the soul, but a world of sensations is a world of men without heads. Once they dined that they might pray and praise, and so dining the function itself was prayer and praise. Now they dine that they may dine again, and pray and praise, as they call it, in order that they may dine. Hence the appearance, which everywhere strikes the eye of an aimless society, an aimless nation, an aimless world. The earth is sick with that sickness. The man was made for activity, and action to any end has some health and pleasure for him. Calculation, if that would only go far enough, would go for enthusiasm too. We only ask arithmetic to go on, not to stop and bolt, and the conclusions of the broker and of the poet shall be one. We are not Manichaeans, not believers in 2 hostile principles, but we think evil arises from disproportion, interruption, mistake of means for end. Is transcendentalism so bad? And is there a Christian or a civilian, a lawyer, a naturalist, or a physician so bold as not to rely at last on transcendental truths? He dares not say it, the blind man. We can well enough discuss this topic with anyone because we believe we are all too deeply implicated for any man to give himself airs and talk down to the rest. Here follows a very short, untranslated sentence, which is not given to us in English in the footnotes, so I'll skip over it. And where did you pick up all this heap of fripperies, Messer Lodovico Ariosto? Said the Duke to the poet. Here in your court, your Highness, he replied. I own that all my universal pictures are nothing but very private sketches, that I live in a small village, and am obliged to guess at the composition of society from very few and very obscure specimens, and to tell revolutions of France by anecdotes, etc., etc. Yet I supposed myself borne out in my confidence that each individual stands for a class by my own experience. Few, as I have seen, I could do with fewer, and I shrink from seeing thousands when in 15 or 20 I have already many duplicates. We are very near to greatness. One step and we are safe. Can we not take the leap? Daguerre, The strangeness of the discovery is that Daguerre should have known that a picture was there when he could not see any. When the plate is taken from the camera, it appears just as when it was put there spotless silver. It is then laid over steamy mercury, and the picture comes out. 'Tis certain that the daguerreotype is the true republican style of painting. The artist stands aside and lets you paint yourself. If you make an ill head, not he but yourself are responsible, and so people who go daguerreotyping have a pretty solemn time. They come home confessing and lamenting their sins. A daguerreotype institute is as good as a national fast. False valuations are not in nature. A pound of water in the ocean tempest or in the land flood has no more momentum than a midsummer pond. We are equal to something, if it is only silence waiting and dying. Let us do that. The piece must have shades too. When the musicians are learning their first scores, everyone wishes to scream, and country orchestras usually have a reasonable volume of voice. Afterwards they learn to be still and to sing under parts. Perhaps we may trust the composer of our great music to give us voice when our aid is needed, and to apply the bellows to other stops when we should mar the harmony. Do what you can, and the world will feel you. Speak what you must, and only that, and the echoes will ring with music. There is so much ennui that I am persuaded if any sign could appear in nature of decay, imperfect chemistry, or the like, men are very ready to believe that the best age is gone. But the youth of nature, which astounds the imagination, repudiates the thought. There are three wants which can never be satisfied. That of the traveler who says, "Anywhere but here," that of the rich who wants something more, and that of the sick who wants something different. The willing or acquiescent are certainly better candidates for that idea which is creating the new world than the recalcitrating. Steam should be solid, every man somewhere solid. Poor men at 6 hours, 6 weeks, 6 months, 6 years. Scholars should not carry their memories to balls. Do you not believe that advertisements are given you continually of that which most imports you to know, but you in the din and buzz of the senses do not regard the vision? Miracles are continually occurring in the private spiritual experience, which the man heeds not in his headlong partisan fury to celebrate and assert the miracles of the church. By attention and obedience to the heavenly vision, he would bring his perception to a finer delicacy. Why Cupid did not assault the Muses may be found in Rabelais, 3rd volume, page 25. October 30th. On this wonderful day when heaven and earth seem to glow with magnificence, and all the wealth of all the elements is put under contribution to make the world fine, as if nature would indulge her offspring, it seemed ungrateful to hide in the house. Are there not dull days enough in the year for you to write and read in, that you should waste this glittering season when Florida and Cuba seem to have left their seats and come to visit us with all their shining hours, and almost we expect to see the jasmine and the cactus burst from the ground, instead of these last gentians and asters which have loitered to attend this latter glory of the year? All insects are out, all birds come forth, the very cattle that lie on the ground seem to have great thoughts, and Egypt and India look from their eyes. Quote, "How dare I go to a person who will look at me only as a psychological fact," end quote, said the threading woman of G.R., and said well. But alas, that this awe which the writers inspire should prove at last to be so ill-founded. They ought to inspire most reverence when seen, and when they can thunder so loud at a distance, not cheap, so small in the chamber. "Ah, if they knew John as well as I," said Mrs. M., "good Paul, whose letters was so mighty, and whose bodily presence mean and contemptible, has too many imitators." The Age. Shelley is wholly unaffecting to me. I was born a little too soon, but this power is so manifest over a large class of the best persons that he is not to be overlooked. There are tests enough of character if we really dare to apply them. Are you setting your expectation of happiness on any circumstance or event not within your control? Vagueness of character. I overheard Jove one day talking of destroying the earth. Soldier. Can one nowadays see a soldier without a slight feeling, the slightest possible, of the ridiculous? The spiritual measure of inspiration is the depth of the thought. How deep, how great its power to agitate and lift me, and never, who said it? But the world answers, Paul was inspired, and would crave a space and indulgence for him in my consciousness. I reply, I do not know the man. It makes then a claim for Jesus. But the great soul says, He shall not come in, no man shall come in, how amiable, how holy soever. Skepticism esteems ignorance organic and irremovable, believes in the existence of pure malignity, believes in a poor decayed God who does what he can to keep down the nuisances and to keep the world going for our day. It believes the actual to be necessary. It argues habitually from the exception instead of the rule. And if it went to the legitimate extreme, the earth would smell with suicide. To believe in luck, if it were not a solecism, so to use the word believe is skepticism. Sickness also has its hero and brilliant vindication. Fontenelle, born feeble, a puny delicate creature, by care and nursing was preserved for 100 years to be the delight of France and of Europe, laid up, they said, like a vase of porcelain in a cabinet, and railed up and guarded to the hold the softest and most volatile of perfumes. Mr. Pope also was born sick and a cripple, yet by care and study of these facts, and engaging, wherever he went, nursing and rubbing from the domestics, he lived long and enjoyed much and gave others much to enjoy. Dandies of moral sentiment. Our contemporaries do not always contemporize us. But now one is continually surprised to find some stranger who has been educated in the most different manner, dreaming the same dream. We like all the better to see some graceful youth, free and beautiful as a palm or a pine tree, who hears with curiosity and intelligence our theory of the world, and has his own, and does not hiss with our hiss, but only has the same mother tongue. Yet do not mistake a fine tulip for good timber. Do not fancy, when you have vivacity and innocence and the charm of youthful manners, and have got for the time the ear of such an one to the gravest themes, do not rely on this polite and facile stripling as on a native and hereditary scholar. The newcomer for the moment casts all merits into eclipse, and the heart gives itself so gladly to the hope of indefinite and paradisaical times at hand. But none can adhere but the men that are born of that idea which they express. But there are ways of anticipating time. Always this cry of time, time, give us time, men are not ready for it, means deficiency of spiritual force. Time is an inverse measure of the amount of spirit. If you are sure of your truth, if you are sure of yourself, you ascend now into eternity. You have already arrived at that, and that takes place with you which other men promise themselves. In poetry, we say we require the miracle. The bee flies among the flowers and gets mint and marjoram, and generates a new product which is not mint or marjoram but honey. And the chemist mixes hydrogen and oxygen to yield a new product which is not hydrogen or oxygen but water. And the poet listens to all conversations and receives all objects of nature to give back, not them, but a new and perfect and radiant whole. We concede, O Miss P., there is a difference between the spirit in which these poor men struggling to emancipate themselves from the yoke of a traditional worship, and crying out in their sorrow and hope, speak at the Chardon Street Convention, and the spirit in which he who is long already free from these fears turns back and knowingly shoots sarcasms at the old and venerated names. That influence which every strong mind has over a weak one. You believe in magnetism, in new and preternatural powers, powers contrary to all experience, and do you not think then that Caesar in irons can shuffle off the irons? The new vegetable is always made out of the materials of the decomposed vegetable, and the triumph of thought today is over the ruin of some old triumph of thought. I saw a man who religiously burned his Bible and other books, and yet the publication of the Bible and Milton and the rest was the same act, namely the burning of the then books of the world, which had also once been a cremation of more. Our American geography is so large that the noisy make no noise. Whoever hears of the American army, or of the formidable sophomores who are said to rebel in our colleges, or of the law students, or the medical students, or of any other local village incendiaries, who when we were young filled whole neighborhoods with alarm. The American government is fast becoming quite as innocent. What can be affirmed or magnetizable subjects? Today, seen unaffected, they are larvae. They are so low and earthy and bestial, they bark and neigh a good man or a poet is repelled who goes near them, as if they would one day be his executioners. But tomorrow a great spirit chances to approach them in a happy and unsuspected way, and they receive his light and influence into all the channels of their being, and are filled with him, enriched and ennobled by this virtue. They are godlike, and he too is twice himself. Straightway the earth seems to have emerged from the primal curse, and a new day has dawned. Great causes are never tried, assaulted, or defended on their merits. They need so long perspective, and the habits of the race are marked with so strong a tendency to particulars. The stake is Europe or Asia, and the battle is for some contemptible village or dog hutch. A man shares the new light that irradiates the world, and promises the establishment of the kingdom of heaven, and ends with champing unleavened bread, or devoting himself to the nourishment of a beard, or making a fool of himself about his hat or his shoes. A man is furnished with this superb case of instruments, the senses, and perceptive and executive faculties, and they betray him every day. He transfers his allegiance from instinct and God to this adroit little committee. A man is an exaggerator. In every conversation, see how the main end is still lost sight of by all but the best, and with slight apology or none, a digression made to a creaking door or a buzzing fly. What heavenly eloquence could hold the ear of an audience if a child cried? A man with the truth to express is caught by the beauty of his own words, and ends with being a rhymester or critic, and genius is sacrificed to talent every day. Editor's note: here follows the passage about Osman, the ideal man, and the broad hospitality to persons half crazed with poor reforms, which is printed in the last pages of Manners. End of note. November 10th. Genius is very well, but it is enveloped and undermined by wonder. The last fact is still astonishment, mute, bottomless, boundless, endless wonder. When we meet an intelligent soul, all that we wish to ask him, phrase it how we will, is, "Brother, have you wondered? Have you seen the fact?" To come out from a forest in which we have always lived, unexpectedly on the ocean, startles us, for it is a symbol of this. Originality. All originality is relative. The young people complain that everything around them must be denied, and therefore, if feeble, it takes all their strength to deny before they can begin to lead their own life. Aunt Betsy and Uncle Gulliver insist on their respect to this Sabbath, and that Rollin's History or Fragment Society or some other school or charity or morning call, which, to preserve their integrity, they resist. Nature never troubles herself with the difficulty which language finds in expressing her. Man begets man who begets man, heedless of the world of contradictions which the metaphysician finds in this contemporaneous procession of body, soul, and mind. Is character an educated will? But bad thoughts, said M. Who could dare to uncover all the thoughts of a single hour? Indeed, is it so bad? I own that to a witness worse than myself and less intelligent, I should not willingly put a window into my breast, but to a witness more intelligent and virtuous than I, or to one precisely as intelligent and well-intentioned, I have no objection to uncover my heart. Certainly the progress of character is in that direction, namely to introduce beauty, the order of beauty, into that invisible and private world of my thoughts, and make them public and heavenly in their discipline. It is a part of friendship with me to carry its courtesies and sacred boundaries into my silent solitude, and not confound distinctions in my fancy which I respect in my reason. November 13th. Originality. The great majority of men are not original, for they are not primary, have not assumed their own vowels, but are secondaries. Grow up and grow old in seeming and following, and when they die they occupy themselves to the last with what others will think and whether Mr. A and Mr. B will go to their funeral. The poet has pierced the shows and come out on the wonder which envelops all. More, he has conspired with the high cause, and felt the holy glee with which man detects the ultimate oneness of the seer and the spectacle. As to the miracle, too, of poetry, there is truly but one miracle, the perpetual fact of being and becoming, the ceaseless saliency, the transit from the vast to the particular, which miracle, one and the same, has for its most universal name the word God. Take one or two or three steps where you will from any fact in nature or art, and you come out full on this fact. As you may penetrate the forest in any direction and go straight on, you will come to the sea. But all the particulars of the poet's merit, his sweetest rhythms, the subtlest thoughts, the richest images, if you could pass into his consciousness, or rather if you could exalt his consciousness, would class themselves in the common chemistry of thought, and obey the laws of the cheapest mental combinations. In every moment and action and passion you must be a man, must be a whole Olympus of gods. I surprised you, O Waldo Emerson, yesterday eve, hurrying up one page and down another of a little book of some Menzel, panting and straining after the sense of some mob, better or worse, of German authors. I thought you had known better. Adhere, sit fast, lie low. Anti-transcendentalists. Yet we must not blame those who make the outcry against these refiners. It comes from one of two causes, either an instinctive fear that this philosophy threatens property and sensual comfort, or a distrust of the sincerity and virtue of persons who preach an impracticable elevation of life. If from the first, it is a good sign and eulogy of the innovators which should encourage them, and let them not be too anxious to show how their new world is to realize itself to men, but know that, as the Lord liveth, it shall be well with them who obey a spiritual law. If from the second, why perhaps the world is in the right, and the reformer is not sound. There is an instinct about this too. It is in vain that you gild gold and whiten snow in your preaching, if, when I see you, I do not look through your pure eye into a society of angels and angelic thoughts within. No man can write anything who does not think that what he writes is for the time the history of the world, or do anything well who does not suppose his work to be of greatest importance. My work may be of none, but I must not think it of none, or I shall not do it with impunity. Whoso does what he thinks mean is mean. How finely we are told in the Hebrew story that the anger of the Lord was kindled against David because he had made a census of the people. Philosophy also takes an inventory of her possessions, and an inventory is of pride. It is the negative state. But poetry is always affirmative, and prayer is affirmative. How much of life is affirmative? How many dare show their whole hand? For the most part we hide and parry as we can the inquisition of each other. I am for preserving all those religious writings which were in their origin poetic, ecstatic expressions which the first user of did not know what he said, but they were spoken through him and from above, not from his level. Things which seemed a happy casualty, but which were no more random than the human race are a random formation. It is necessary, says Iamblichus, that ancient prayers, like sacred Isla, should be preserved invariably the same, neither taking anything from them nor adding anything to them which is elsewhere derived. This is the reason, doubtless, why Homer declares that Jove loved the Ethiopians, and Iamblichus, in answer to the query, why of significant names we prefer such as are barbaric to our own, says, amongst other reasons, barbarous names have much emphasis, great conciseness, and less ambiguity, variety, and multitude. And then afterwards, but the barbarians are stable in their manners, and firmly continue to employ the same words. Hence they are dear to the gods and proffer words which are grateful to them. And the ancients spoke of the Egyptians and Chaldeans as sacred nations. Now the words God, grace, prayer, heaven, hell, are these barbarous and sacred words to which we must still return whenever we would speak an ecstatic and universal sense? Then are objections to them, no doubt, for academical use, but when the professor's gown is taken off, man will come back to them. The granite comes to the surface and towers into the highest mountains, and if we could dig down, we should find it below all the superficial strata. The question of property wants seers. The staunchest Whig and the poorest philosopher are all on the property side, all abettors of the present abuse, all either owners or enviers. No man is on the other side, no man can give us any insight into the remedy, no man deserves to be heard against property. Only love, only an idea is on the right side against property as we hold it. Good scholar, what are you for but for hospitality to every new thought of your time? Have you property? Have you leisure? Have you accomplishments and the eye of command? You shall be the Maecenas of every new thought, every untried project that proceeds from good will and honest seeking. The newspapers, of course, will defame what is noble, and what are you for but to withstand the newspapers and all the other tongues of today? You do not hold of today, but of an age, as the rapt and truly great man holds of all ages or of eternity. If you defer to the newspaper, where is the scholar? Hints, fragments, scintillations of men enough and more than enough, but men valiant and who can execute the project they learned of no man, but which was born with them there are none. Perfect and execute yourself an Orson, if Orson, a Valentine, if Valentine. Let us see at least a good Orson, and know the best and worst of that. November 18th. Queenie's dream of the statue so beautiful that the blooming child who was in the room looked pale and sallow beside it, and of the speech of the statue, which was not quite speech either, but something better, which seemed at last identical with the thing itself spoken of, it described to the fair girl who sat by, and whose face became flushed with her earnest attention, life and being. And then, by a few slight movements of the head and body, it gave the most forcible picture of decay and death and corruption, and then became all radiant again with the signs of resurrection. I thought it a just description of that eloquence to which we are all entitled, are we not? Which shall be no idle tale, but the suffering of the action and the action it describes, that shall make intent and privileged hearers. The blue vault silver lined with hills of snow. November 22nd. Edith. There came into the house a young maiden, but she seemed to be more than 1,000 years old. She came into the house naked and helpless, but she had for her defense more than the strength of millions. She brought into the day the manners of the night. Editor's note: on the 2nd day of December, Mr. Emerson began his course of lectures on the Times in the Masonic Temple in Boston. 1. The Introductory. is printed in the first volume of the works as Lectures on the Times. 2. The Conservative. 3. The Poet. Much of the matter is in Poetry and Imagination and lectures and biographical sketches. 4. The Transcendentalist. 5. Manners. 6. Character. 7. Relation to nature. 8. Prospects. End of note. Robin Hood. Little John asks Robin, "Where shall we take? Where shall we leave? Where shall we rob and beat and bind?" Robin says, "Look, you do no husband harm that tilleth with his plough. These bishops and these archbishops ye shall them beat and bind. The High Sheriff of Nottingham, him hold in your mind." When Jones Very was in Concord, he said to me, "I always felt when I heard you speak or read your writings that you saw the truth better than others, yet I felt that your spirit was not quite right. It was as if a vein of colder air blew across me." He seemed to expect from me a full acknowledgment of his mission and a participation of the same. Seeing this, I asked him if he did not see that my thoughts and my position were constitutional, that it would be false and impossible for me to say his things or try to occupy his ground as for him to usurp mine. After some frank and full explanation, he conceded this. When I met him afterwards one evening at my lecture in Boston, I invited him to go home to Mr. Adams with me and sleep, which he did. He slept in the chamber adjoining mine. Early the next day, in the grey dawn, he came into my room and talked whilst I dressed. He said, "When I was at Concord, I tried to say that you were also right, but the Spirit said you were not right. It is just as if I should say, 'It is not morning,' but the morning says, 'It is the morning.'" "Use what language you will," he said, "you can never say anything but what you are." All writing is by the grace of God. People do not deserve to have good writing. They are so pleased with bad. In these sentences that you show me, I can find no beauty, for I see death in every clause and every word. There is a fossil or a mummy character which pervades this book. The best sepulchres, the vastest catacombs, Thebes and Cairo, pyramids are sepulchres to me. I like gardens and nurseries. Give me initiative, spermatic, prophesying, man-making words. I am probably all the better spectator that I am so indifferent an actor. Some who hear or read my reports misjudged me as being a good actor in the scene which I could so well describe, but when they came to talk to me, even those who fancied they strictly sympathized with me found I was dumb for them as well as for others. In this both I and they must be passive and acquiescent, and take our fortune. And now that I have said it, I shall not suffer again from this misadventure. It is never worth while to worry people with your contritions. We shed our follies and absurdities as fast as the rosebuds drop off in July, and leave the apple tree which they so threatened. Nothing dies so fast as a fault and the memory of a fault. I am awkward, sour, saturnine, lumpish, pedantic, and thoroughly disagreeable, and oppressive to the people around me. Yet if I am born to write a few good sentences or verses, these shall endure, and my disgraces utterly perish out of memory. Woman should not be expected to write, or fight, or build, or compose scores. She does all by inspiring man to do all. The poet finds her eyes anticipating all his ode, the sculptor his God, the architect his house. She looks at it, she is the requiring genius. We ask to be self-sustained, nothing less. The rude reformer rose from his bed of moss and dry leaves, gnawed his roots and drank water, and went to Boston. There he met fair maidens who smiled kindly on him, then gentle mothers with their babes at their breasts, who told them how much love they bore him, and how they were perplexed in their daily walk. "What," he said, "and this on rich embroidered carpets, with fine marbles and costly woods? Who was up so high as to receive a gift well? We are either glad or sorry at a gift." December 12th. We cannot forgive another for not being ourselves. Yet that is not all my dream just now, but this also, that only the affirmative is good, and methinks that is as much in what is called Whiggery as in Protestantism, for the latter falls into cold recusances, and love is the affirmative. Whigs love, Protestants have a good deal of hating to do. Loyalty is affirming, idleness is denying, but out on your exhibitions, there is somewhat a little scenic and showy in your lecturing. Those who take up thus much thought into action have nothing to say, no rhetoric to please with, but it is elemental, strong. It is like that great quantity of heat which ice absorbs in becoming water without any indication on the thermometer. And yet Raphael's picture is bold and beautiful, affirming in the Midsummer Night's Dream in every thought of mine which I naturally and happily speak. Let me not be witty, but only faithful and bold and happy, and I put all nature in the wrong. We lose time in trying to be like others, accusing ourselves because we are not like others. If something surprises us from our propriety, we act well and strong because we lose our fright, the recollection of others. Those who defend the establishment are less than it. Those who speak from a thought must always be greater than any actual fact. I see behind the Whig no mighty matter, nothing but a very trite fact of his land titles and certificates of stock. But through the eyes of the theorist stares at me a formidable gigantic spirit who will not undo if I bid him, who has much more to say and do than he has yet told, and who can do great things with the same facility as little. In the feudal table the humblest retainer sat in the company of his lord, and so had some indemnity for his thraldom and the education he derived from the spectacle of the wit, the grace, and the valor of his superiors. Mr. Frost thought that there would not be many of these recusants who declared against the state, etc. I told him he was like the good man of Noah's neighbor, who said, "Go to thunder with your old ark. I don't think there'll be much of a shower." Osman. Seemed to me that I had the keeping of a secret too great to be confided to one man, that a divine man dwelt near me in a hollow tree. A dandy gaudrelot in French, a favorite word with Napoleon. Napoleon was calm, serious, and well calculated to stand the gaze of millions, and De Abrentes describes the splendor of his smile. And cakes by female hands wrought artfully, well steeped in the liquid of the gold-winged bee. Plutarch. Following this there is a short quotation from Ovid, which is untranslated. Historians of reform are not necessarily lovers of reform among their contemporaries. Among the powers of circumstance, none so striking as the provocation of thought in particular companies. Every art may be learned for itself, such as that of composure and good behavior in all companies, but a better way is to be inspired by a sentiment which shall ennoble the behavior without intention. The man is yet to arise who eats angels' food, who, working for universal aims, finds himself fed, he knows not how, and clothed, he knows not how, and yet it is done by his own hands. The squirrel hoards nuts, and the bee gathers honey, which without knowing what he does, and thus they are provided without any degradation or selfishness. In the man I should look to see it adorned beyond this innocency with conscious efforts for the general good. Trees draw 19/20ths of their nourishment from their aerial roots, the leaves. The Peace Aller of Romanism for Tieck, Winckelmann, Schlegel, Schelling, Montaigne, Dana, Coleridge men. Midsummer night entertainment can easily seem to me profaned, and I shall do penance for having delighted in such toys, and Dante must shrink before a great life and appear a permitted greatness. To those who have been accustomed to lead, it is not quite indifferent to find their word or deed for the first time unimportant to society. Yet a human being always has the indemnity of acting religiously, and then he exchanges an éclat with the society of his town for a reputation and weight with the society of the universe. Every word we speak is million-faced or convertible to an indefinite number of applications. If it were not so, we could read no book. Your remark would only fit your case, not mine, and Dante, who described his circumstance, would be unintelligible now. But 1,000 readers in 1,000 different years shall read his story and find it a picture of their story by making, of course, a new application of every word. All Bernardo's wit and study did not enable him to answer M. de Gulliver's question. As it happened once, so it happened 20 times. M. de Gulliver asked pointedly of the scholar for information, which he should certainly have supplied, but poor Bernardo always wondered that he should have failed to inform himself of just that particular fact. Afterwards he found that it was just the same with his actions. He was very able and very willing to do 1,000 things, but the particular action which must now be done he was not ready for, and so he played at cross purposes with all men in this world. One thing more Bernardo remarked, and said as much to Xavier, that he was convinced it was a chance and not a right that he had received the laurel of the Sorbonne. For I, said he, was not made by nature for an original genius, but to take delight in the genius of others. I was made to read Virgil, and not to write bucolics of my own, for always, if I have anything to say, it clothes itself in the language of some poet or author I have been reading, or perhaps of one of my friends with whom I daily converse. The thought is not born sufficiently vigorous to clothe itself. Credit, it seems, is to be abolished. December 18th. We believe in the existence of matter, not because we can touch it or conceive of it, but because it agrees with ourselves, and the universe does not jest with us, but is in earnest. A man founding a reputation for benevolence on his expenditure, a great blunder. How much one person sways us. We have so few. The presence or absence of Milton will very sensibly affect the result of human history. The presence or absence of Jesus, how greatly. Well, tomorrow a new man may be born, not indebted like Milton to the old, and more entirely dedicated than he to the new, yet clothed like him with beauty. As we take our stand on necessity or on ethics, shall we go for the conservative or the reformer? The view of necessity is always good-tempered, permits wits and pleasantry. The view of liberty is sour and dogmatical. Both may be equally free of personal consideration. Woe unto me if I preach not the gospel. I like the spontaneous persons of both classes, and those of the conservative side have as much truth and progressive force as those on the liberal. Do not be so grand with your one objection. Do you think there is only one? If I should go out of church whenever I hear a false sentiment, I could never stay there 5 minutes. According to Bayman, the world was nothing else than the relievo, the print of a seal of an invisible world concealed in his own bosom. See Penguin, Volume 1, page 123. When in our discontent with the pedantry of scholars we prefer farmers, and when, suspecting their conservatism, we hearken after the hard words of drovers and Irishmen, this is only subjective or relative criticism. This is alkali to our acid, or shade to our too much sunshine. But abide with these, and you will presently find they are the same men you left. A coat has cheated you. What a plague is this perplexity! We are so sharp-sighted that we are miserable, and, as E.H. says, can neither read Homer nor not read him. Quote, Kepler's science was a strange alliance of that sublime science of antiquity which proceeded by inspiration with that modern science which measures, compares, analyzes. Penguin. Leibniz predicted the zoophytes. Kant predicted the asteroids. Newton the decomposition of the diamond. Swedenborg, Uranus. Penguin, Volume 1, page 159. They say that the mathematics leave the mind where they found it. What if life or experience should do the same? Writing also is a knack and leaves the man where it found him, and literature and nature and life. All that a man hath he will give for his erect demeanor, that he may never more be ashamed. Society the measure. I go to you, and I expand, and I go to another, and I contract. Look out of the window, and it is eternal now. Look in faces of men, and it varies every minute. Reading Herrick, I feel how rich is nature. This art of poetry, I see that here is work and beauty enough to justify a man for quitting all else and sitting down with the Muses. Did not Caesar say to the Egyptian priest, "Come, I will quit army, empire, and all if you will show me the fountains of the Nile"? Well, all topics are indifferent. You may reach the center by boring a shaft from any point on the surface with equal ease. And yet in this instance of poetry, the provocation is not that the law is there, but the means are alluring. This is the end of Journal Collection number 32 by Ralph Waldo Emerson. Thank you for listening.